in Latin America miss opportunities or to really take advantage of the talent that is here, who has already been trained at the highest level. So there are my 2 points. Bring scientists from different disciplines together, and also see to that young people get the kind of chance and opportunities to show their real talent. Thank you.
Last issue that Thorsten brought up, which is the support of the Pew Foundation, P-E-W, a huge philanthropic foundation in the U.S., that Thorsten convinced 21 years ago or so to support that exchange program where you bring scientists from Latin America to spend 2 to 3 years in the U.S., and then they give them a little dowry to come back to their local countries, $60,000 or so. So they have an incentive to not only want to come back for personal reasons, but they have a little bit of funding to start their own laboratories. And this program, the Pew Latin American Fellows Program, has been incredibly successful with around 80% return rate. I want to contrast this with what Chile did, which is completely backwards. They started a program where they're going to provide money for 1,000, 2,000 Chileans to go and train outside. All right? First, they're going to have to go to New Zealand or Australia, because they are the 2 countries they had the program at that time. Maybe they added 3 or 4 more. And then they require them to come back, to pay back for the money spent on their training. The first thing, you don't want them back. You only want the good ones back. You don't want the idiots back. I mean this sincerely, okay? Science is not a democratic enterprise. It's meritocracy. You want the great people to come back. So that was the first fundamental flaw with the program. And the second...
Sorry, we don't send idiots to study.
No, I'm sorry. Look.
Sorry, you should be careful.
Look, I didn't say you send idiots. I said you don't want idiots back. All right? Look, I regrettably was exposed to a significant subset, and I was utterly unimpressed. But
you have been quite biased.
it's possible. That's why it's my opinion. All right. And the second point is that if you want them to come back, you need to give them the means to succeed. You cannot want them back and not give them the resources to then open their wings and fly freely. And I think that unless you provide the ecosystem, like both Maniatis and Thorsten highlighted, then there is no good in sending people if you don't give them then, the means to do great. Now, let me go to Richard.
We've largely discussed and agreed on the enormous importance of the development of science to maintain the economic and physical well-being and pride of a nation. I'd like to, and economic well-being of a nation. And I would just like to bring up perhaps a more conceptual point, and that is, it's very likely that everybody in this room attended college. And it's equally likely that the families of many in this room could not afford to send their children to college, yet they sent you to college. And the implication of that is that in a nation that is developing so rapidly and so effectively, you want to create a life in a nation where ideas matter, where you take pride in the generation of knowledge, and where you have a nation in which you can replace bad ideas with better ideas. You need to maintain an enduring quality where knowledge is important. That's conceptually, it seems to me, an essential tenet of any rapidly developing nation. Historically, it's been demonstrated that economically, politically, those nations with the strongest emphasis on ideas and science also emerge as those nations that are economically, politically, globally the most effective nations. Nobody would disagree with the idea that you want an educated populace in Chile to emerge, a populace in which truth takes precedent over ideology and politics. And in order to do that, you need to provide the educational support, as Torsten brought up, so as to create a platform for the generation of new thinkers in this world. And you need to recognize, as has been emphasized, that you cannot dictate the goals of a scientist. The idea, as Susumu has mentioned, of imposing goals, the development of a drug for age-related memory loss, the development of scientific efforts that will yield potential economic fruit within 1 or even 5 years is antithetical to the development of meaningful science and to meaningful economic progress. This is simply not how science works. You need to think about the development of a free intellectual community in Chile. And we in the United States are suffering from some of the problems that have been discussed as well. There is, in the United States, an overemphasis on what is called translational research efforts. And many around this table are really engaged in serious discussion and argument with the funding agencies in the United States. You are a nation whose scientific community is emerging, and you can obviate those problems by recognizing the fallacies in even more established nations.
So I've spent a lot of time thinking about what makes science successful, agreeing with many of the points that people here have made, and look about the value of science that comes out to a country, to locally, to the city where great scientific institutions are, like Boston, where the biotechnology industry grew up, like Silicon Valley around Stanford, where the technology industry grew up, and a lot of engineering. And I think the things that really make these places work is that within the scientific communities, there was intensity. Okay. There's great intensity, is that what it takes is when you have people together, they have to be a group of people together trying to solve an important unsolved problem. You need an intensity of energy. You need critical mass. You need smart people like to be with other smart people. And the best way to get really great work out of a smart person is to put them with another really smart person who challenges them. And that is true for our students, and that is true for us in our companies. You dilute people by putting them around weaker people. You concentrate people and multiply people by putting them around other excellent people. So where you can build science is to bring people together who are really excellent and who will build each other. They can be people from the same field. They can also now, in complex fields, often be people from different fields. In neuroscience, in our field, there are now people from physics, people from biology, people from computer science working very closely. And the benefits from that have come not only to neuroscience, but actually back to some of those other fields in ways I could talk about. And then the second thing with that intensity is that everyone really has to have clarity on what they're trying to achieve. And I think one thing that sometimes people miss is they're not sure whether their job is to solve an important unsolved problem or to get a patent, or whether their job is to do important science that moves the field forward, or primarily to be an educator. Everyone should know what it is they're trying to be the very best at. That doesn't mean that's the only thing you do. There's always elements of other parts of all of our jobs. But I think if you're trying to tell people to do 3 different things, they can't be the very best at all 3 of those things. So focus and intensity and critical mass are what really take great human capital and great intentions and turn them into great progress and benefit.
Share their views on how we can help improve both the funding and the quality of science in Chile. I think I want to restate at the beginning, we have tremendous human capital. But the issue is not talent. The issue is how you provide that talent with the resources to really do very special work. Now, maybe we could start with the venture capital side. Then we could move on to some of the members of the upcoming regime. Oh, I forgot the translation, the government, yeah, it's my choice of words, yes.
Can we just ask questions?
Yeah, oh, of course, yes, now, we can do it now if you wish.
And I just want to put one question on the table.
Yes.
And maybe Cornelia, you could take the question on the floor, because this is something that happens in Chile very strongly. You see maybe 7 women in the room, 8 women in the room. And science is not an independent world. Science has this bias where it's very difficult for women to achieve results. And I've seen and read in different places in the world that women and science have had special career paths in Germany, maybe in the US. Europeans are very worried. Could you please touch a little bit on how public policy can help women to achieve better in science? And the next meeting in 10 more years, we might have 50% of the table of women scientists sitting here with us.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing to say is that 7 women around the table is much, much better than 6 women around the table. And a lot of what we need in every field is just to be excited about the progress that has been made over the past 40 years and to realize that we are not finished. We were at this symposium yesterday which was very competitive to get into. Many people had to be turned away. It was a sign of the enthusiasm there was for neuroscience in Chile. And when I looked out in that room, I saw half girls and half boys. I saw half women and half men. There is a lot of enthusiasm for science, I would say, in Chile among young women. The second thing you need enthusiasm. That's the first thing. That seems to be there. Second thing you need, and I should say that there were also the winners of the high school science prizes who came. And it seemed to me like 4 out of 6 of them were girls, if I was counting correctly. Okay. 5 out of 6. There we go. So, seems to me so enthusiasm is there, ability is there. What do you need? You need opportunity. You need places for them to go that are truly excellent, where they will have wonderful mentors and they will grow. And I think they need to see also women who are older than them. I'm very excited that the Neurological Institute, our hosts, has 11 faculty and 3 are women. That is a good number. 3 is better than 2. 4 would be better than 3. It's really positive. So you need enthusiasm, you need opportunity, and then you need encouragement. And I would say encouragement you get from other women. Encouragement is something we can all do, men and women, when we see young women of talent, as well as young men of talent. We can think about that, tell someone that they're doing a good job. And then finally, there is one issue, I think, for women in particular. The access to really excellent, low-cost child care support, so that you aren't expecting the women to take 2 very complicated jobs on their own, but that the community is supporting their decision to do something of intensity, I think is important.
We have this sense, we might be wrong, that President Bachelet during her previous term did wonderful work in trying to change the landscape for opportunities for women in terms of child care and pre and postnatal support and so forth. Is that right? That makes life significantly, better as you try to keep a very competitive career and help on the other side. Is that the case, or it could be better? Is that what you're? I see. And there was another question there. Yes, yes.
Yes. Wow. Thank you. Well, in analyzing the lead that the United States had in the Internet revolution and the biotech revolution, Professor Nathaniel Rosenberg found out that one of the key elements was certainly the fact that a lot of money was channeled from public agencies to the scientific system. But there was also another key element, and that was the capacity of the university system to react very quickly to the new incentive that were put out there for them to take. In comparison, for example, with the European system, which was very slow to react. And I'm referring to, for example, the creation of new careers, the combining of different kind of scientists in order to work in new fields, et cetera, et cetera. I have the feeling that one of the problems that we face in Chile is that the university system is quite rigid. It's inflexible, it's slow to react, and I know Pato Meirelles is there, particularly Universidad de Chile, it's quite reluctant to move sometimes. Sometimes there are enormous possibilities that are shown to them, to the university, and I have the impression that they are very slow, they're very rigid, I don't know. So my question is, how is this capacity of the university system in the United States being an asset for you to develop what you have done with great success?
Let me just start with my views. I think this reduces to resources again. I bet if the University of Chile had a lot more resources, they would have the flexibility to translate those resources into change. Why don't we get the answer from? Yes.
We have listened to you, and I think it would be good if you would listen, you would accumulate some of the views we have. Let me be very frank and say the following, that we do agree that ideas matter, that the generation of knowledge matters, that science matters, and that we would like to have an intellectual society, the way you put it. But I think you need to have an understanding that there is a big difference between a developing country and a developed country. And I'll put forward the following question. Can Chilean scientists push 1 millimeter the world's science frontier? Should we do that? What would be the resources required in order to do that? In what disciplines? And there I could use a comparative advantage where it is, should we put forward world public goods as a priority in this country? The amount of resources, like you put it very well, in this country it's quite restricted. It's not unbounded like almost is at the USA. So what does that mean? That the resources in this country for science, for research, have to compete with resources that this unequal society requires for social issues on education, health, housing, on one side. On the other side, we live in a global world, and we require resources in order to make this economy quite competitive. Let me give you an example of what has happened in this country, how priorities are established. And in this country and in most Latin American countries, we had 200,000 students, university students, marching in the streets and putting higher education as a top priority, quality of higher education as top priority in the country. And what has been the result? That was 2 years ago. That now we're discussing a tax reform in order to generate the resources in order to be able to have that changes in higher education. So I don't think we're going to have even 1,000 research PhD researchers in this country marching on the streets in order to put basic research science as the top priority in this country. So I think, and here I disagree with something fundamental that is behind the way you are biased in order to put most of the resources into basic science. And this is how priorities, how should research priorities be established in a country like this? And I'll tell you my priorities. In Chile, copper plays a fundamental role. And we are going to have copper for the next 50 years. Copper is fundamental for growth, for exports, and to generate the resources for the government in order to fund all the other things, including basic research in science. So if copper is so fundamental in this country, I think that most of the research should be focused in copper issues, how to expand the copper uses, the demand for copper, how to reduce the cost of copper, and how to develop new technologies in order to avoid or to try not to compete with copper substitutes, because if there appears, like it's being said, graphene as a close substitute of copper, we will be in real trouble. And I'm not talking short run, I'm talking long run. And the same thing is happening with all our natural resources. So I think in this country, focusing on problems, on basic problems, that's what this country has to solve. And I don't care if it's basic science or if it's applied science, but it's the issue what counts. It's the problem what we have to solve. Put the problems on front and not what the researcher would like to think about that could happen in 50 years' time. I mean, that's, I think, the key thing, how priorities for research are being established.
Well, first, I completely disagree with Patricio. And there is a group in Chile of people, especially economists, that have that view, that science is not important, that we should tweak around with our natural resources, we should improve yields in the industry, we should improve markets, but the money shouldn't be used for basic science. First, the amount that is needed to change Chile in basic science is very low compared to what, well, you don't know very well, Patricio. If we just increase our 0.4% to a 0.8, which is nothing compared with the bonuses and with all the things that the governments have given to people without thinking in science. Second, we haven't been able to convince that Chile, the politicians as well as the economists of Chile, at least part of the economists, not all of them, that Chile has to go to the economy of knowledge and to continue to think in the copper, to continue to think in the natural resources. It's okay, because it's our salary today. But we expect for Chile something a lot better than that. Chile has the opportunity to move into the society of knowledge. And if we don't use a part of our funds to fund science in an intelligent way, we are sending 1,000 people a year to the US, basically undiscriminated. Half of them shouldn't get a PhD, but if you give them a very good fellowship, of course they will go. All that money is spent in those people that when they come back, they don't have anything to do. 1,000 PhDs. We don't allow them to do postdocs, which in science is important. The problem here is one of policy, and second, a little bit of running the risk of funding science. A lot of underdeveloped or developing countries today in the world, they were like us, and they are in completely different situation today. So that's our problem, Charles. We cannot convince governments, we cannot convince economists that usually have a strong role in the governments we have had. And those economists don't believe in basic science, don't believe in science in general, and of course they have a very good wish of developing things which are of practical, immediate use, like Patricia said. So how we solve that, I don't know. It was in the program of Presidente Piñera, there was a big emphasis at the beginning on trying to do something for science. He did nothing. It didn't work. And the previous also. And the one that we have now, there is nobody talking about science. In fact, the few ones that are here, and I see them doing this with their heads, they think science is not part of the new government also. So we have big troubles, Charles. That's all I wanted to say.
Look, yeah, we're gonna go to the next question, but let me just intercede 1 second and say that what made developing countries developed countries was basic science. 100 years ago, we had coal engines connecting the US. And today, we're going to Jupiter. All right? This is nothing but basic science. Now, I think the logic here is to let you guys debate with each other. So we could appreciate the local folklore and logic. So please.
Thank you very much. So I will introduce myself. I'm Juan Larraín.
You have to put the microphone.
I am a biochemist. I was very fortunate to be a Pew Fellowship in the past. Currently I'm Vice President for Research at Católica University. Currently I'm Vice President for Research at Católica. I was a Pew Fellowship in the past. I first want to thank the organizer because it's important that we're discussing. And clearly we have here 2 or 3 or many positions, and I think this is something that we have to thank. And it's always better in Chile to discuss with some foreigners because this gives a more importance to discussion. So my very simple proposition or view based on my career is that we should trust on people and we should invest on people. I don't think that anybody can know what is going to be important in 10 more years. We have many examples. For example, Finland is one of the most famous ones, Nokia, that was dedicated to forestry, and then they produced phones. So we should invest on people, and I think it's a great opportunity here that we have the private sector here, that sometimes we think that funding science is very expensive, but if you invest in people, PhD students, chair for professors, it's not such much amount of money. We are very fortunate at Católica that we have many philanthropic partners like COPEC, the Angelini family that's funding an innovation center. But always when you talk to them, you realize that they want to see applied science because they don't know or they don't trust in us as scientists that something is going to come out in 10 more years. So if we invest in people, and this is what the Pew Foundation has done, and I want to say that my career was very fortunate because I did my PhD here in Chile because there was a private foundation, Fundación Andes. Unfortunately, it disappeared. Then I did my postdoc in the States with money from Pew Foundation. So if you invest in people, it's not much amount of money, but you have to trust on scientists and invest on people. Then these people is going to create new knowledge and new, perhaps if this guy is good and is working in copper, fund him. But first, trust on the scientists and invest on people. That will be my suggestion. And I think that this will solve the issue of sending 2,000 PhD students to the States or to Europe. That has a second problem for us. We have developed PhD programs in our universities. Some of them are 50, 60-year-old. And for the last 10 years, we start to lose the good students. Because, of course, it's much nicer to go to the States or to Europe. So we really need help from the private sector to invite those students to stay in Chile and then go abroad. Because science is a research issue. We, as leaders of other groups, we can't do the best if we don't have the best students. So, and on top of the sending students abroad, we are losing those students. So if we find a way to invest in people, companies providing fellowship, companies providing chairs, this is going to help because we always talk about the small amount of money that we invest in science in Chile, but the government is doing most of the job. So the private sector also needs to help on that. And as Cornelia was saying, it's better to have three than two. There is a lot of things going on. So there is private sector funding science. The only issue is that we need more, and I think that it should be based on people and not on topics of science.
The floor is open before we go to another round. Yes.
Hi. I am an economist, Pablo. You know that. I am a researcher in Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez and used to be in government. I agree with Pablo that we have to really have a goal of moving the Chilean economy to a more knowledge and human capital intensive economy. That's very important because we have vulnerabilities relying all our destiny in few natural resources. And what happened in the last 5 years is that we have become more concentrated in copper. And we are more dependent than before. We are not saying that we should not take advantage of our natural resources, but we have to have a long-term strategy to really diversify, to make more sophisticated our economy, to really invest in human capital, but at the same time, to create a business sector that invests in technology that is more innovative, that see value in advanced human capital, and we could create in that way synergy between investing in human capital and a private sector that have the need for it. And the problem is that looking at our innovation statistics in companies, in business, we have a survey, the OECD survey on innovation. And when you look at the figures, you realize that we are moving down dramatically since 2004. The top was reached in 2004. Product and process innovation, what percentage of companies over 10 workers undertake product and process innovation? Organizational innovation. We have come down from 32% to almost 10%. It's a major decline, major decline. In a way, the problem that we have is that we have an economy which is a kind of a rentist economy, too much bias with the goal of capturing the rents of natural resources, and not very innovative. You are here telling us that the way to solve the problem is to invest heavily in science. This reminds me the US 1945, the Vannevar Bush document to the president. Science, the endless frontier. The approach there was very similar to what we have here today. Invest in science, because with science, we won the Second World War. And we are going to win the world investing in science. That was basically the message. And President Truman was convinced, and the National Science Foundation was created. But after 30 years, they realized that pushing money into science was not enough to have development, to impact in productivity. And then two senators, create the Bayh-Dole Act because they needed tangible incentives to move science to production. Then it was not right to think that just investing in science that will impact the economy. That was the conclusion in a developed country that was moving the frontier, moving the frontier. After many, many years in the US, you have a record. You are the king of a spin-out of high-tech companies. But the figures shows that you have one spin-out out of $100 million invested in science and research. One. England has one every $60 million. Then you have, in a way, a very linear approach from science, applied research, innovation. Well, this linear approach may have worked in biology, in biotechnology, but have not worked at all in engineering, in ICT, in other areas. It's non-linear, the process. It's much more complex, the process. And then we have to create all the components of the ecosystem in order to have this working. And let me tell you that we invest in Chile overall in everything from sewage to education, no more than $12 billion a year in total. $12 billion, 4-5% of GDP. That's the investment that we do, government investment. And of that investment, 10% is invested in science, 10%. I would like to see the comparison with other countries. And the problem that we have is that the private sector, sorry, not 10%, 1%, is 0.4% we invest in science. Yes, 1.4, yeah, it's 10%, that's right. And the problem that we have, when you look at developed countries, 70% of the investment in R&D is done by private sector. This creates the push to bring, it's a demand pool that creates the impact in the economy. But in Chile, 70% is invested by government, by universities, and we don't have here the private sector. And I could tell you, putting more money in science is not going to change the situation. Of course, it's a mistake to send 1,000 people a year to create PhDs and not having enough resources to absorb them. You are putting the resources in a way which is not rational. But this doesn't mean that we have to triple the resources for science, because we have not been able to create the linkages between science, technology, business. Then there are many priorities, and this is a much more complex problem that we have to be discussed with arguments and not with dogma.
I wanted to go back to something you mentioned about how you create an ecosystem so we don't bring the idiots back to Chile, the one we're sending to study abroad. So I got a chance to go to Stanford. I got a master and I didn't get a PhD, so I'm afraid I'm one of the stupids who came back. So, but I wanna.
After your question.
That's when I'm trying to be short, so you don't get it right. I wanna ask you about how do you think because in Chile there are very few researchers who have become directors or entrepreneurs. Pablo must be one of the few ones. I'm a little ignorant on the subject, so I might be wrong. But you mentioned that Professor Susumu has been an entrepreneur, has been director of many companies. I assume Professor Thompson has also does it. But what I see in Chile is that most of the time researchers stay in the labs and they don't go abroad. What I got the chance to see in Stanford was that there were many professors, not so sure in basic science, but in other fields, who, with their research, start companies or became entrepreneurs. I assume that that's also the case with some professors in basic research.
Actually, that's a very good leeway into having perhaps our venture capitalists here.
So I want to
because they are the catalyzers of change.
What do you think is missing in Chile? Why this doesn't happen? I tend to think that it's not because we have like bad researchers.
I think it's the private sector involvement. So perhaps why is there only one venture capital?
Unfortunately, because there's only one venture capitalist around. So it's 100% of the subset.
No, but give us your sense as to how do you catalyze a new engine of involvement by the private sector, helping, science move from the bench to either the bed or to, the clinic.
Understood.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with your initial comment where you say that we try to make Chile a powerhouse of basic science. And I do agree, though I think it's somewhat incomplete, because I doubt that you will ever see somewhere that you have a country that has a power base of basic science that doesn't have an ecosystem with translational science within. People try and push forward for results of basic science. Of course, people want to see 1-year results, 2-year results, or 5-year results, or whatever. But at the end of the day, they want to see results. And results will come through translational science at some point. The problem that we have is that historically in Chile, unfortunately, from Chile, we haven't seen results from that basic science. And that is something that you can count 1 government, 2, 5 governments behind. And you start making the count, and we have not seen that high impact success story from Chile that will basically push us forward. And that is what we're missing. And in order to get that, probably resources are not that much if you know which one is that high impact success story you have to back up. But you really don't know. You have to tackle it from a portfolio perspective. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons why, and just answering your question, why don't you see more entrepreneurs, is because translational science is not funded by governments. Translational science is funded by private sector. And when you come to Chile, you see Chile is a small country that has absolutely no success story and no history of science. You see in the US, when you go to the US, I hear the comments from our US scientists, and they're all very well intentioned, but they lack one thing, that they all take for granted the fact that the money is there to fund good science. And in Chile, that's yet to be proven, because you have no single high-impact success story based from science, homegrown in Chile, and exported to the world that can show and transform itself into a beacon that can show the private sector that there's an opportunity and there's a business case for investing in science. So we're at this catch-22, where we want to create and we want to be able to cater and we want to be able to grow and transform something from this basis of science that we have, but the money's not there because the private sector wants first to see that it actually works. But the catch-22 is that without that money, that science is going nowhere. So how do we do it? How do we break that catch-22? Well, we have to probably find something and devote a lot of effort into something that's probably going to have to be handpicked, which is not very political, because at the end of the day, political resources and government resources, it's very hard to pinpoint and say, I'm going to give you critical mass. The government, and I have to say both Michelle Bachelet's prior government and Piñera's government have tried to put money into the private sector's hand to push for science. But the problem is, it's not very political to say, if I have $30 million, I'm going to give $50 million to 2 companies. They'd rather say, I'm going to give $500,000 to 60 companies. And when you're at that bridge of translational science, there is a critical mass of resources needed to make the jump. And those critical mass of resources are big numbers, which are not very political to be given around. And that's a problem. So we're at this stage, and thank you for empathizing, because that's my day-to-day. How do we actually make a break, and how do we, with incomplete resources and capabilities, be able to create one success story which is real, can really cater to the attention of the first world, that can show them that Chile's basic science, which is really high quality, can actually give way to the birth of successful companies. And at that point, really, we will not need a lot of Chilean money because international money is going to flow here. The problem is that most of these venture capitalists haven't even gone below the Rio Grande. How are you going to fly them 12 hours to Chile for them to see when today there's a plethora of potential things for them to do right next door? It's very tough.
What's the size of the fund? I want to get a sense of
Yeah,
how
well,
much
it's
venture is there in
it's so
venture.
negligible that it would be basically a mockery in the U.S.
So let me continue being the bad guy, perhaps, and the provocateur here. I think there is a fallacy in the way our comments are being interpreted. This is not just about increasing the amount of funding. I think you're misunderstanding half of the issue. It's about how the funding is being used. What we're trying to tell everyone in here is don't increase the amount of money. Keep the money for all these other programs. But you need to fund with a long-term view. That's what we're trying to tell you. We're trying to say that the notion of giving you people a 1 or 2 year grant and expecting a 1 or 2 year return is fundamentally flawed. Because that stifles creativity. I cannot be creative if I have to give you a result in 1 year. In any of our 6 laboratories, I cannot think of a single project that would take less than 5 or 6 years. And so it's not just about the amount of money, it's how it's being allocated. And that requires a fundamental change from the top down. Now, let's continue with our open arena. Yes. No, it's 5, but they need a 1 year report. Yeah?
I think a large number
but
of
that's an
very
exception. You cannot talk about exception. Come on.
there are a large number of very good points which have been raised. One of the things, as a foreigner to Chile, who's been working here now for 3 years, I agree with the 2 key things which I think Charles is making. One is we do have few really long-term fundamental science programs. And I was really surprised on a personal level that some people who have got very high standing in one of the local universities came to me and tried to sell me a technology program which I developed about 20 years ago in the UK. That was the level of science which was being developed here at the moment. And I thought, you must be kidding. You're trying to sell me my patents and I have to pay for it? So I think it was about the quality. Somebody up there in the table raised the question about the quality, and I think that's probably what Charles was driving towards too. The quality of some of the science is very poor. And we need to increase the quality of the basic science to be able to make the translational science work. Another comment, the present government have tried very hard to attract centers of excellence, and we've benefited from it, and obviously Telefonica benefited from it as well, to be part of that translational system. But I'm sure you will probably also comment on that. To be able to do that translational system in your area, where do you find the scientists who've got the experience in the areas which you require for the delivery of what you want to do here in Chile for your project areas? You know, we've been quite lucky that we've got a very good pool of people, but the quality in general, which I see, is not as good as it really should be to be able to achieve the things which our US visitors are referring to.
Has been trying to do the last several years. So they, Singapore is a small country, so it's very easier to run the country. It's working? All right. So everything is done in top down. And what they have been trying to do, I'm sure somebody else knows better than me, but they are importing scientists at the transition period from abroad. Okay? And use them as the anchor persons, and trying to also give some funding for students, Singaporean students, to go abroad with the contract. They have to come back in, 3 or 4 years, or 5 years maybe. And I'm sure what they want to do eventually is to have their own, their research fundamental research organization made up with Singaporeans. But in order to have a jump start, they've been talking with many more advanced countries with more advanced research and targeting to specific institutions, like MIT. Okay? And so if you want to establish, I mean, we've been discussing about the quality of basic research here. One policy, I mean, if a government, if people agree that the importance of raising quality of basic science, this may be one model that you could adopt. I mean, you know, 150 years ago, actually, when the Japan modernized, that's what they did. They got professors, researchers from Europe, like Germany and England and so on. No, I don't know whether this will be a good idea here or not, but I just want to present this as a possibility.
Actually, I think that's a pretty good idea. Chile has done importing of people in different areas before. You know, we have settlers that have you know, lived in the south of Chile in different times, and we've personally and in our institution we've talked about that several years ago. But that requires government really appreciating and believing that we need to do this. We have developed in our institution another model which we think can also be explored, and basically it's a very close interaction with an institution and basically California institutions, mainly UCSF, and I think that's partly what this other Millennium Institute is doing with some of you. I mean, if we could have several Millennium or main centers of excellence hanging from the developed countries, big institutions, and do strong collaborations and work together, that's also a jump start. But for that, we also need good funding, because it means being able to do good research here and being able to send students, bring students, and so forth, real strong collaboration programs. But that's a good jump start, rather than having to create everything from the start here.
Why don't we turn the
Could I?
question around for a second, and we bring the views of the private sector, which are to some degree our hosts today, and see what are their views, what are their concerns, what would they like to see, and what would they expect in return. I think Torsten had a point, though, before we turn the subject around.
Yeah, I sort of somewhat disturbed about some of the comments because of, I mean, in some ways, I never thought about Chile as not being a developed country. I think you're it's a highly developed country. There are some economic issues, but in terms of the students that sent abroad, they are excellent, well-trained. You have a good basic education system here. You're at the springboard to take advantage of all the talent you have here, but you're not providing the opportunities for the people really to show. You don't have to import scientists from other countries. There is a lot of talent here. You just let it grow. And you have the seeds to be planted, and they will grow strongly. And I think you're hiding behind and thinking because you're a developing country, you don't are competitive. That's not true. You're highly developed. You have a lot of talent and good science here. 30 years ago in biophysics was what best in the world. So it's just a matter of providing opportunities, I think, and you shouldn't hide. And the other thing that I disagree about, your point that you focus on copper, you need diversity. I mean, Norway have made a mistake of, they have all the oil, so they put the money in the bank instead of investing in other. Russia made a mistake. They had all the Putin was a very bad leader because you had the oil money and he didn't invest in diversity and support of science. So I think you should not listen to the copper lobby, but to see too that that you get the private enterprises get the thing going. That's the only thing I wanted to say. Thank you.
Why don't we then have some of the leaders of the private sector exactly give us their views?
Sure. Well, if I may, first of all, I think the debate has been very interesting and very important. I think we need more of this kind of rounds and tables to discuss these issues. And from my private company experience, I would like to comment in this company where I feel that our executives have different visions, when we have different opinions around a project or an objective, we are very concerned. And from this debate, what I see is we need in Chile to work around a common vision, how to capture the opportunity around science and development. And I think we have a perfect opportunity, a perfect time to devote time to try to get a common vision. For me, from a private experience, it's impossible to be successful if we do not have a reasonable common understanding of the target, of the objective. And my second comment is, right after a common vision, we need to discuss about execution, how to be successful executing that vision. And maybe this is related with leadership, is related with resources, is related with responsibilities. And frankly speaking, what I feel is, and this is coming from the private sector, we have not been able to solve the equation behind cooperation, private and public. I think it's quite difficult to us to understand what is the model behind that cooperation. As Wolfgang said, we are trying to start in this initiative. We are creating a center of excellence in Chile with a modest budget of 20 or 25 million US dollars. But it's difficult to start. It's difficult to understand what is the contact from university side with private sector. What is the real commitment that you need as a universities from the private sector? How we can transform good ideas into real initiative. We have, I think, many opportunities, many doubts, and maybe the time for Chile now is to discuss and try to get a common vision, how to transform this country from the tremendous opportunities we have, the tremendous resource we have, the tremendous talent we have in good experience of cooperation, public and private, and science and development.
Wonderful, absolutely. It's at the core of how we can engage the private sector in making and catalyzing change. But we have many more members of the private side. Is that private or public? No, it's private. But bear with me 1 second. I would like to give people that haven't had the chance to speak yet also the chance to voice their views. You haven't spoken yet, have you? No. Okay, so let's start here and then we'll go to Marcos, okay? We'll have the two of them and then we can come back around to people that have spoken before.
I think that the discussion what we're having should be concentrated just on more science or less science or more money or less money. I think it's more about the interconnection between science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And that all of them should be interwoven together in such a way that they produce results for those who want results, produce knowledge for those who want knowledge, because people have different interests and societies work through the assortment of different views and capacities and talents. And to achieve that, you need to create a densely populated ecosystem, and with a high density node connection in between all the different nodes. And that is something that has been created or is being created in Chile step by step. So the problem about low budget or short-term vision that you mentioned will change only if politicians change. But the politicians won't change their minds just because they will discuss things with with scientists or with or technologists or with the private sector, because it needs to be something that is part of the culture of the nation, that science, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship are important. And that is not easy to come about because politicians work on votes, and votes are given or handed out by all of the people, not just those who are here represented at this table. So one way of making this an important issue for the public is the success stories that Alex was mentioning. But there's another idea that some people have been involved, and I'm involved with it, that might help, and that is to have some kind of interesting concept that would capture the imagination of the public here in Chile. And that is the idea of natural labs, that we have some unique, world-unique natural labs that can really change the nature of the research that we do and the impact that researchers have. One of them is, of course, the skies, the northern skies, where astronomy is being developed. At the end of this decade, Chile will probably have about 2/3 of the capacity to receive data from the sky, and that has an impact not only on the astronomy discipline, but also on high-performance computing, on data storage, and all sorts of other things, algorithms, and mathematics, and all of that. There's also the Atacama Desert, which has unique features, not only in the capacity to receive solar energy, but also extreme organisms that live in extreme conditions. And also, the third one would be the subantarctic, the Antarctic, which is part of Chile in a way. The Antarctica is, as we know, owned by the world, so to speak. But Chile has the closest connection with the Antarctica, and Punta Arenas has a very strong scientific community and is the base for the scientific research teams that go there. So I think that if Chile works with that concept in an appropriate way, it might be able to help. One of the ways to help the private, they capture the imagination of the public and make it more difficult for the political sector not to engage with our ecosystem that, as I said, included science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So I think it's, and this, of course, is a step-by-step process. There's no silver bullet, and I think the country is working in that direction, and it needs to focus and concentrate in a more effective way.
Thank you. I'm a strange person. I am an economist, and I have invested in applied science. I ran a molecular laboratory, and I was success in Chile. It was Diagnotech, probably you know it. We sold it, and I earned money with that. I also have invested in microbiology, running microalgae to make fuel in the States, and I have lost money on that. I'm now investing in microalgae to make omega-3, and I hope I will earn money. Okay? So making investments in science in Chile is not easy. You do not have the support from the government. You do not have the means to do that. There is no help to patent things in Chile. When I work with scientists in other countries, there is a lot of help to patent all their ideas. There are clusters to patent things. One case is Israel, where a lot of patents come every year because scientists do not need to make the bureaucratic work. I want also to use the opportunity that there are future government assessors here. It is going to come a discussion on the tributary aspects of the country. I think if you can keep in mind to use one part of that discussion on the tributary reform to fund science could be helpful. I think that also if a part of pension funds could fund venture capital on this, could be helpful. Thank you.
I'd like to, just one.
Where are we?
Here.
Who has the? Yeah. Oh, okay, go ahead.
I'd like to add a point of what Marco said. Chile has the figure of 0.4.
Move the microphone a little farther away. The other way around.
Chile invests 0.4% of its GDP in science. We've been discussing whether the public sector should. We've been discussing whether the public sector should invest more or less in science. We have to take into account that Chile is the least, the investment that the public sector makes in Chile is the least one from all the countries in Latin America. Argentina invests, I think, 0.8, and Brazil, I don't know if 1% or a figure around that. So the public investment in Chile is in science is very low, and if we're talking about raising taxes, this government and the upcoming government, they should think about one little part of it, funnel it to science, because if the public sector shows that it is interested in science research, the private sector will follow, but the private sector will not follow anyway if it sees a lenient government that doesn't care about science. Okay.
I don't think it's on.
There it is, sorry. Just a very short comment, but I represent BHP Billiton, which is a multinational company. We have more than 9 million shareholders in the world. This is, I would say today, the biggest mining, commodity, diversified mining company in the world. So the biggest companies are oil, gas, or we have 5 or 6 commodities in our portfolio. And as such, we do very, very, very top-of-the-notch basic research, and we fund it worldwide. And we look for it where it is best in the world. So we have contact basically with Australian researchers, with people in Singapore, with the US, with European researchers. And it has not been easy to find basic science and basic research in Chile. So that's my first point, and I would, and I mean it very seriously at the top of the notch competitive research, basic research, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I would, and just to pick up on Alvaro's comment, astronomy, the Atacama Desert, why are they different than copper? Copper is what we will live on as an economy for the next 50 or 60 years. We should have, and I don't mean this would be a benefit for BHP Billiton and Escondida mine. I think it would be, if Chile hits the notch in something in copper, we will make not a revelation for a business. We will create a platform from where basic research can be developed in different fields. This is Danny Roderick's basic paper, Harvard professor of economics, which he says, when you have industries that can feed basic research and that you can provide for this knowledge acumen and consolidation, for the focus, for the encouragement, then you can breed a new class of research in these countries. And Danny Roderick compares this in South American countries with a very interesting paper done 10 or 5 years ago, in which Chile does not excel in any way. We do not cross-pollinate between industries. So what we need to do better is to cross-pollinate. And my third point is, I think we have done, as BHP Billiton in Chile, a lot of support for the translational science. We have invested we've invested in the good sense, in the social investment sense, $20 million in Fundación Chile. We've paid for different human capital programs with University of Chile and Patricio Meller. We've done, but we are alone. And I have to say this, we need to have more companies that have no interest in their business, in investing directly in the business in these countries, but that have the interest of creating a knowledge base which increases the social capital of the country, because that's good for the business. It's not to invest directly in basic science, but to look that basic science will come after social tensions are avoided, after the country has more knowledge-intensive industries, and social capital is created in networks in these countries. That's our view as a social private company here in Chile. But we do basic research in the world, and we do a lot of basic research in the rest of the world.
I'm saying you're having two sides.
No. I can tell you that we believe that will come. But today,
we want you to lead the change.
We are leading. I wouldn't even flush to say that we are leading today in Chile.
Okay.
But I think that there's more to
be done.
More to be done.
Yeah, we agree. I think, Andres, by the way, we're getting close to the time that we need to be closing. Yeah?
So, this maybe we'll sort of start the closing of the session. But first, I think I couldn't agree more that investing more in research would make a difference. I really like the idea of the natural labs, but I also think that people that we've funded during the past 30 years is also a fantastic resource. So maybe it doesn't have to be only copper, only the skies. We need to diversify, and we need to have also the conviction that the people that we've invested, and that the 30-year program that we've continued to invest in Chile, we have to take advantage of that. We've been investing heavily for 30 years, and we have good people now sitting at this table that come from that program, come from that continuous investment in science over the past 30 years. So I think that's also a natural lab. We have the people. And the other thing is, I think we need action. I think we have too many plans to make documents that define our roadmap. I think we need to do actions. And two of them, I think, is two kinds of actions. Is first, as Claudio said, improve the connections between science, the scientific community, and the private sector to really populate the ecosystem. And I think this meeting is an example of that, and we should have many more of these. This is action. I'm not saying that we need to create a document. I think from here can come ideas, connections that will move it forward. That's one thing, actions in establishing connections. And the other, just to bring a point that was made before, I think there's no point in convincing politicians. We're not going to convince politicians if we don't convince the public first. So the actions need to be directed to the public. This is what we did yesterday. We had a massive event at a very highly symbolic venue in Santiago, and I think this is the way forward. Convince the public that science and the whole pipeline that follows is what we need to share with the public, and that way politicians will have no option but to listen to what we're trying to say.
Ask Thorsten to bring some of the closing remarks.
Charles?
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. We have one.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the private sector. I come from a private company. I come from 3M. And we have done an investment in Chile in the last 3 years, very focused in the thing about science and how to develop things. We have invested in a lab in the north, so we have a lab in the north of Chile, and also we're investing in a lab here in Santiago. And this lab has two capabilities. We have 26 labs, 6 of them are for basic engineering, and the other 20 are for the next steps to develop products inside Chile. And one of the things that we have, and the things that we have to talk about here, is about the dual ladder. Why talk about dual ladder? We have a lot of good scientists in universities, but we don't have good scientists in companies. So how can we create that dual ladder for scientists inside companies and be able to talk about that and be able to create that connectivity? For us has been very tough and very complicated to bring into the companies good scientists to be able to work in basic and then in the next steps of engineering to produce products and services and processes. And I think that dual ladder in the US exists in some companies, but here in Chile what we have seen is that you're a good scientist, you have a good thing in your university, and then you have to start up a company and be an entrepreneur to be able to develop your own way up. But you have companies as a dual ladder, and we have to work that out. And the other thing about that is, for example, we have just invested in a professor here in Chile, almost $4 million in a project that has been closed last year on the 26th of December. We have been working with him for more than 2.5 years in that project, but has been a lot of IP work. We have to do the IP in the US and stuff like that to be able to validate that process, and it's in the mining sector. So we have things going on. We have amazing people here in Chile, but we have to work in also that dual ladder of how to be able to create union between the areas.
I've listened, and I think despite the apparent disagreement, there is some agreement. And that is, it does appear that everybody here is deeply interested in science, in the generation of knowledge. That everybody agrees that the amount of public funding allocated to science, even Professor Meller, seems inadequate when compared to the rest of the nations in the world. As Torsten pointed out, this is a nation with a great deal of talent and a great deal of future potential that needs to be supported. It also appears that there is not enough government emphasis, government interest in science, and that needs to be altered. It's my understanding that this government does not have a minister of science. That seems to me, as an outsider, utterly outlandish. Whether that's science, be basic science or translational, the notion that the government will not dedicate both intellectual and interest resources in the future of science in this country needs to be corrected. It also is clear in listening to the private individuals from the private sector that there is a serious investment in science, that could be enhanced enormously, and that investment largely relates to the interests of the individual corporations. And so one thing we haven't discussed, given that there is significant representation of the private sector, is philanthropy. That is the dedication. Chile has been economically extremely successful. people have made money, and their philanthropy is the sharing of wealth without any personal sense of economic return. Increasingly around the world, even in well-developed nations, philanthropic support of science is playing an increasingly important role. Important because, as we emphasized before, goal-directed science often is not the most creative or innovative science. So it appears to me that Chile wants a meaningful scientific community. It simply it is not an answer to say that Chile cannot afford a scientific community. And the government needs to recognize this and dedicate significant organizational and financial support. The corporations need to stand behind this effort, and those fortunate enough to have earned their wealth in this country need to provide additional support. I recall that a $1 billion contribution in aggregate can support 100 to 200 scientists at a level that will allow them the freedom of investigation necessary for a first-rate scientific endeavor. And so it seems to me that if this meeting had any impact at all, it's to bring together a group of people who have a deep interest and a deep commitment in seeing the intellectual support of a scientific community emerge with greater strength. Thank you.
So, just to close, I want to thank our two hosts for today, Karen Poniachi, that coordinated and organized the event, and Claudio Muñoz, that so graciously provided the venue where we could do this. So on behalf of the six of us, thank you very much. Thank you.